1971-72, Australia played against the rest of the world in a five international series. That was to make up for South Africa not touring the country. The rest of the world were in a bit of trouble. The first Test match had been very much rain affected in Brisbane, so that was a draw. And then in Perth, Dennis Lillee absolutely wrecked the rest of the world. He got 8 for 29 in the first innings. They were bowled out for 59. Garry Sobers had made a duck out to Dennis Lillee, and Australia won by an innings and plenty in Perth. So they were 1-0 up. Australia had taken a lead in the third match in Melbourne, and quite a substantial lead on the first innings. And the credibility of the whole tour was in a bit of strife. Garry Sobers was out for a duck in the first innings for the rest of the world, bounced out by Dennis Lillee, first ball. And that night we were having a drink together in the dressing room, and Garry walked over to Dennis and said, "Well bowled, Dennis." And he said, "But just remember," he said, "I can bowl bouncers too." And he said, "And I bat better than you." And then when Dennis came in, Garry bowled a few bouncers at him. Then Garry came into bat in the second innings, and his side was in a bit of strife. And he scored a magnificent 254 just to underline what a great player he was. I'd had the good fortune to play with him for a couple of seasons in the South Australian side. So I'd seen at very close quarters how good a player Sobers was. But this was just reinforcement. He smashed us all over the park, and it was a good attack. I think Lillee and Massey were in the side. I think Jenner and O'Keefe were the spinners. And I remember it was still the days of rest days in the middle of a match. And going into the rest day, Garry was 132 not out. And as I say, because I'd played a lot with him, we knew each other pretty well. And when I walked into their dressing room that night to have a drink with the opposition, Garry was sitting on his own over in the corner. And that was a bit of a surprise to me, because Garry was normally in the thick of things. He loved to, be chatting about cricket or whatever it might be, but in with his team. And he called me over. He said, "Ian, come over." And I walked over, and he said, "Sit down." And he said, "Mate, Prue's left me." Prue being his wife from Melbourne. And I said, "Garry, if that's what's pissing you off," I said, "give me her phone number and I'll ring her up and tell her to come home immediately." A bit of dark humour, I guess. And when he didn't laugh, because Garry was very quick to laugh, I thought to myself, this is quite serious. But it didn't stop him taking it out on us in when he went out to bat again. And as I say, he was 132 not out. He went on to get 254. It's an innings that Bradman described as the best that he'd seen. I remember there's one shot in particular I remember. Kerry O'Keefe was bowling to him, and Garry used to have this, he had it's not really a high back lift, but he had that really big cock of the wrist, much like Brian Lara for the younger generation. If you remember Brian Lara, then that was very similar to Garry's wrist cock. And then he had this huge follow through. When he really got after the ball, he'd finish, and the bat would sort of finish right down the middle of his back. And he hit this thing, it was pretty well a straight drive. And Kerry O'Keefe virtually sort of ducked. And the thing just kept going, and it sort of went like a plane taking off. And it went for 6. And that shot has always stayed with me. But that innings was, Sobers was a genius. He's the best batsman I've ever seen. Forget all the other things. Forget what he could do as a bowler and as a fieldsman and as a captain. He's the best batsman I've ever seen. And that innings of 254 just confirmed it for me.